You wake up, check your compost bin, and suddenly they're gone. A thriving colony of red wigglers has vanished overnight, leaving behind sour scraps and a smell that tells you something went wrong long before you noticed it. This isn't random, and it isn't bad luck. Worms don't just die off quietly, they leave. What you're seeing is a full-scale migration triggered by stress. When conditions shift beyond their tolerance, worms activate what can only be described as a flight response. They climb, crawl, and escape en masse, often during the night when temperatures and moisture gradients shift fastest. By the time you open the lid, the exodus is complete. The real issue is rarely visible at first glance. Bedding can look fine, scraps may seem normal, yet the internal chemistry has already crossed a threshold. This silent killer builds slowly, then hits all at once. Most bins don't fail gradually, they crash. One of the most common triggers is acidity. Worms thrive in a near-neutral environment, but modern kitchen scraps tend to push things in the opposite direction. When large amounts of fruit waste, especially citrus or sugary leftovers, are added all at once, fermentation kicks in rapidly. Microbes break those sugars down, producing organic acids that lower the pH. You'll notice subtle warning signs before the worms disappear. The bedding may become sticky or slimy, and the smell shifts from earthy to sour. In more advanced cases, you're dealing with what's often called protein poisoning or sour crop, where decomposition turns aggressive, releasing gases that make the environment unlivable. The correction is simple but powerful. Crushed eggshells act as a natural buffer, slowly neutralizing acidity while adding grit that worms need for digestion. A light dusting across the bin can stabilize conditions quickly. Garden lime can also help, but restraint matters. The goal is balance, not swinging the system too far alkaline. Even if your feeding is balanced, environmental swings can push a stable bin into crisis. As seasons shift, especially during warming periods, internal temperatures can rise faster than expected. A bin sitting in partial sun or enclosed space can easily exceed the safe range, turning into a heat trap. At the same time, moisture becomes a tightrope. Too much water fills air pockets and cuts off oxygen, effectively drowning the worms. Too little dries their skin, which they rely on for respiration. Either extreme triggers escape behavior. The simplest diagnostic tool is the squeeze test. Grab a handful of bedding and press it firmly. It should feel like a wrung-out sponge, moist but not dripping. If water runs out, it's too wet. If it crumbles and feels dusty, it's too dry. Adjusting this one factor alone can stop a mass migration before it begins. What separates resilient systems from fragile ones is the presence of a refuge. Worms need a place to retreat when conditions spike, and that's where carbon-rich bedding becomes essential. Shredded cardboard, dry leaves, and paper materials act as a buffer against both chemical and temperature swings. Deep bedding creates layers, and those layers create stability. When fresh food begins to heat or ferment, worms can move downward or sideways into cooler, more neutral zones. Without that buffer, they have nowhere to go except out. A well-built bin always contains more carbon than food. That balance doesn't just prevent odor. It creates an internal ecosystem where worms can regulate their own environment instead of reacting to sudden changes. Consistency is what keeps a worm system alive long-term. Large, irregular feedings are one of the fastest ways to trigger a crash. Smaller amounts, added more frequently, allow microbes to process waste gradually without overwhelming the system. Pre-composting your scraps for a few days before adding them to the bin makes a noticeable difference. It softens the material and initiates microbial activity, turning raw waste into something worms can process without stress. Fresh scraps are unpredictable, partially decomposed ones are stable. Monitoring tools can take the guesswork out entirely. A simple soil probe that tracks temperature and moisture gives you real-time insight into what's happening below the surface. Combined with a quick monthly check of smell, texture, and worm activity, you can catch problems early and correct them before they escalate. A healthy worm bin isn't just about feeding scraps, it's about maintaining balance. When moisture, temperature, and pH stay within range, worms don't just survive, they multiply rapidly and transform waste into rich, living soil. If you want more practical, time-tested methods for building resilient soil systems that actually work, subscribe to Timeless Humus Path for more grounded, no-nonsense guidance that keeps your garden thriving year after year.